the cutting-edge technical tool that could save freedom of speech, and more importantly, save lives. The Defense Enabling Assistance Framework, or DEAF protection, has proven to be the state-of-the-art digital communications security technology, and is so powerful and stealthy that governments have gone to great lengths to protect it. Visit us at defprotection.com. That's defprotection.com. In the annals of international crime, never has there been a more disturbed, depraved, or borderline insane assailant than the serial killer. On True Crime Man's Dark Imagination, we have profiled serial killers, mass murderers, child murderers, and all those from the dark side of the crime spectrum. We presented those killers who paid for their crimes and those that have escaped justice through one way or the other. The profile in this episode examines the scourge of loneliness and loss that turned away from basic human compassion and developed into a penchant for murder.
Late in 1978, two men met in a pub and began drinking. This binge would occur for over 5 hours until, finally, the older man asked the younger one to accompany him to his apartment located at 195 Melrose Avenue in London. When the two arrived at the older man's residence, they drank more and more until they wound up in the older man's bed. When they awoke, the older man started running his hands up and down the young man's body, becoming aroused with every groove of the younger man's physique. But what went through the older man's mind was that this Adonis would be leaving as soon as the morning sun crept through the curtains. The older man looked over at the pile of discarded clothing as the two men were laying naked next to each other. The older man noticed a tie within the garments and got out of the bed to retrieve it. He took the tie and, straddling the younger man still asleep on the bed, placed the tie gently around the young man's neck, grabbing both ends as he did so, and began to tighten the tie. The young man struggled feverishly, but could manage to move the struggle to the floor of the bedroom. When the older man braced his younger victim against the wall, he realized he had choked him into unconsciousness, but the young man was not quite dead. The older man went into the kitchen, filled a bucket with water, and went back into the bedroom where the young man lay limp upon the floor. The older man raised the victim into a chair and, leaning his head back, forced the younger man's head into the bucket of water. The victim failed to struggle. The bubbles stopped coming to the water's surface, and that's when the older man realized he just murdered someone in his apartment. He didn't even recall the young man's name. After murdering his young visitor, the older man made himself a cup of coffee and then went into his garden, smoking some cigarettes while he contemplated what to do next. The older man removed the tie from the corpse, put a towel over the window so no one could see into the apartment, and placed the dead body over his shoulders and brought him into the bathroom. He placed the corpse into the tub and ran the water, washing the young man's hair. After he finished primping the body, the older man dried off the corpse and carried the body back into the bedroom, where he gently placed the limp body into the bed. The older man sought to keep the corpse there, never to leave again. The older man began to run his hands over the still warm flesh of the corpse, admiring the perfection of the physique. It was at this time that the older man realized that he had forced a change to his life forever. Nothing would ever be the same. That afternoon, the older man went to a local hardware store to try to buy an electric knife, but decided he could not cut the body up that way. Instead, When he returned to his apartment, he prepared the body with clean underwear. The older man tried to have sex with the corpse, but discovered that he could not sustain the same level of arousal as he had when the young man was alive. Therefore, he took the corpse off the bed and placed it on the floor, covering it with a curtain. He then fell asleep. After he awoke, the older man realized he had to do something with the body. At first, he tried to pry some boards up from the floor of the apartment, but he realized that rigor mortis had set in and the limbs would not bend. He placed the body in the corner of the apartment in one of the corners, hoping that the stiffness would pass. However, the next day, the stiffness did not disappear, and so the older man worked to loosen the corpse's joints. The older man succeeded in loosening the joints and placed the body in the wooden grave beneath the floorboards. After a week had passed, the older man wanted to satisfy his curiosity and decided to open the boards to see the condition of the body. When he pried the boards loose, he noticed the body was very dirty. He carried the body to the bathtub again and washed the body. The older man then washed himself in the same water and carried the body back into the living room. Before placing the corpse back under the floorboards, the older man masturbated over the corpse. After finishing, he placed the corpse back under the boards, not removing it again until 7 months later when he burned the remains, where he added rubber to cover the stench. With this murder, an attempt to conceal it, this murderer truly believed that he would never do this again. However, it continued to happen 14 more times, becoming more gruesome than anyone realized. The older man, Dennis Nilsson, was a former police officer that left the organization when forced to confront his own sexuality, and decided that he never wanted to be alone again, even if he had to murder to keep his company subdued. Dennis Andrew Nilsson was born on November 23, 1945, the son of a Norwegian soldier, Olav Magnus Nilsson, and Betty White, to a strict household located in Fraserburgh, a small fishing village near Aberdeen, Scotland. Nilsson's father never took an interest in the family and left his wife and child when Dennis turned 6 years old. An adult male figure stepped into Dennis's life, his grandfather, Andrew White. White played a particular joy with his grandson, yet he still maintained a strict and pious atmosphere. Dennis found contentment and happiness with his grandfather as well, but that all came to an end on Halloween Day, 1951. Andrew White was found dead of natural causes on his fishing boat. Dennis's mother refrained from telling Dennis that his grandfather had died. Nilsson did not realize his grandfather had died until he saw his body lying in his coffin. When he finally realized that his grandfather would not be around any longer, Dennis accepted a world of loneliness that pervaded throughout the rest of his life. As Nilsson grew into adolescence and then finally adulthood, he remained uninitiated into asexuality, but still felt urges at certain times. At the age of 15, Nilsson joined the Army. During the first 3 years of his Army career, Nilsson felt a sense of camaraderie with being barracked with other men. The discipline and the regimentation gave him a feeling of belonging to something meaningful. Yet, he felt a strong urge in his attraction to other men. Nilsson felt that he was probably bisexual and felt a sense of contentment with that identification. Nilsson took training as a member of the catering corps, where he amassed skills in the art of butchery, taking apart animal parts for the consumption of the men within his unit. During this time in the military, Nilsson took to drink, which would later prove to be his undoing. While stationed in the Middle East, Nilsson experimented with sex with other men and a young Arab boy. While serving in this particular theater of operations, Nilsson also fantasized about being in bed with a corpse. Nilsson powdered his body with white talcum powder, painted his lips blue, and watched himself in the mirror as he fondled his genitals. He began to confuse love and death in his mind. Prior to his discharge from the Army, having attained the rank of corporal, Nilsson received a posting in the Shetland Islands. There, he fell in love with a young private who did not return Nilsson's affections. When Nilsson discovered that the young man did not feel the same way, He burned home movies where he and the young man were the subjects. So far, Nilsson spent 11 years, 3 months in the military, and looked forward to a long, promising career. However, he became disillusioned at the treatment of the people in Northern Ireland and the politics involved, and left the army as a bitter man, returning to his childhood home, where he stayed until he got into an argument with his brother. It appeared that the argument centered on homosexuality, an argument so volatile that Nilsson left the house and never spoke to his brother again. In December of 1972, Nilsson applied and was then accepted to the Metropolitan Police Training Program in London. Nilsson hoped that he could recapture the comradeship he experienced in the army, but Nilsson became disillusioned with police work as well. Also, at this time, he began to frequent several gay bars in the area during his off-duty time. After serving just a year as a police constable on one of his shifts, Nilsson shined his flashlight into a car where he noticed 2 homosexual men engaging in sexual activity. His duty as a police constable was to report this to his superiors and arrest the 2 men. Nilsson just could not bring himself to perform his duty and resigned after having served only 1 year with the force. After leaving the force, Nilsson lived on the verge of abject poverty until offered a job with the English Civil Service. He decided to work the civil service job and stayed there for a long period of time. By 1974, Nilsson sought solace in cruising the gay bars of the area, but never engaging in sex. One night, he met a man named David Gallichan. Immediately the 2 hit it off. Gallichan suggested the 2 live together, therefore setting up house. The 2 bought a dog they named Bleep, and Nilsson used the affectionate title for his new lover, Twinkle. They rented a flat together at 195 Melrose Avenue, London. Everything appeared copacetic for at least 2 years, and then the relationship fizzled out as Gallichan lost interest in his lover. The 2 men began bringing home pickups, and even, one time, Nilsson brought home a woman. That surprised both of them. When Gallichan finally moved out, Nilsson threw himself into his work, continued cruising the gay bars, and drinking rum until he passed out on countless nights. When Christmas arrived, Nilsson sank into a deep depression. By December 30th, 1978, Nilsson felt the pangs of loneliness and desperately desired company. Nilsson claimed he went to one of his favorite haunts and met Stephen Dean Holmes. In 2006, police finally identified the victim as a 14-year-old, and witnesses stated he was heading home from a pop concert when he ran into Nilsson and did not meet the young boy in a gay bar. After Holmes' murder, Nilsson laid low for a time, but attempted to murder a young man named Andrew Ho during the course of 1979. But this victim fought back and waited a long time before reporting the attack. Nilsson's second murder occurred almost a year after the first, when on December 3, 1979, he met a Canadian student named Kenneth Okendon. Nilsson literally approached Okendon at a gay bar, and later he accompanied Nilsson to his flat. When the 2 arrived, Nilsson suggested to his intended conquest that he listen to music through Nilsson's headphones. No sooner had Okendon placed the phones around his ears, Nilsson pounced on the unsuspecting tourist and strangled him to death. Nilsson sat down in a chair and listened to music while the body lay on the floor. He removed the corpse's clothing and brought it into the bathroom to clean it up in the tub. Nilsson placed the corpse in bed with him as he slept beside the decomposing body. In the morning, he stuffed the body into a cupboard, got rid of the clothing, and then went to his job. While Nilsson worked, the body became very rigid in a doubled-up position. When Nilsson returned home, he cleaned the corpse again, dressed it up again, sat the corpse in a chair, and began taking photos of Okendon in various positions. Later, Nilsson moved the corpse to his bed where he tried to have sex with it, and when he finished, he buried the body beneath the floorboards. Every once in a while, Nilsson would remove Okendon's body from underneath the floorboards and had him watch television. Okendon was one of the few murder victims that was reported missing. Nilsson once said of Okendon, I thought that his body and skin were very beautiful. Nilsson often dressed Okendon's corpse up and set him in the bed next to him, telling the corpse good night. On May 13, 1980, Nilsson met his third victim, Martin Duffy, who was a troubled 16-year-old youth that needed a place to stay, and Nilsson offered him accommodations for the night. After drinking 2 beers, Duffy went to sleep. As he slept, Nilsson crawled on top of the youth, trapping his arms beneath the sheets, and strangled him to death. Duffy was still alive after the strangling, so Nilsson brought him into the kitchen, and Nilsson drowned him by pushing his head into a sink full of water. After the murder, Nilsson brought Duffy's body into the bathtub where he washed the corpse and, lying next to it, stated how beautiful the youth's body appeared. When finished in the bathtub, the murderer brought Duffy's corpse into the bedroom where he kissed the youth all over his body, then straddled his chest and masturbated. Nilsson first placed Duffy's body in the cupboard, and then, after 2 weeks, under the floorboards. Eventually, though, he realized that he was steadily running out of room. At one point, Nilsson pulled up the floorboards and removed the bodies, dismembered them in the bathtub, and then boiled the body parts within a large pot. When he finished boiling the skin from the skulls, Nilsson placed them in a series of suitcases that he bought for this specific purpose. Nilsson next engaged the services of a Scottish male prostitute named Billy Sutherland. Sutherland had sex with men for money, and although Nilsson spurned the young man's advances, Sutherland followed the older man to his residence. Nilsson could not remember exactly how he murdered Sutherland, but later police determined that Nilsson strangled Sutherland to death. Again, he dispatched Sutherland as he had done the other victims. Soon, Nilsson held a bonfire where he burned the remains he already concealed. When all was said and done, Nilsson had 2 bonfires during his residency at Melrose Avenue. So far, Nilsson had 6 bodies stashed in his apartment. With some, he would change out into his bed, where he would have sex with the corpses for as long as a week. The control that he exhibited gave him so much power, it would be hard for him to relinquish it when the time finally arrived. Because of the rotting corpses in his apartment, flies infested the abode, and neighbors began to complain of the smell. Nilsson once remarked to one of his neighbors that the building they lived in exuded that aroma. Nevertheless, the murderer called an exterminator to terminate the flies until such time as he disposed of the bodies. In one instance, hoodlums broke into Nilsson's apartment, and when he called the police to report the incident, 2 detectives walked around his residence without detecting the bodies underneath the floorboards. As long as the bodies mounted, Nilsson soon branched out with his disposal areas. The floorboards obviously became cluttered, and the murderer buried body parts and organs in the gardens surrounding the apartment building. It is no wonder that sniffing dogs did not dig up the gruesome booty. Nilsson himself often wondered why people did not question him further regarding his activities, even while holding bonfires and burying body parts in the gardens adjacent to the apartment building. During one fire, Nilsson spotted a skull in the middle of the burning mess and removed it, allegedly crushing it to dust. The next 5 individuals that Nilsson murdered have not been identified, and frankly, Nilsson could not remember murdering nor disposing of their bodies. The 6th victim, a young Irish laborer Nilsson met in a bar. The 7th victim, Nilsson described as a hippie type that he found sleeping in a doorway. His 8th victim, he could not identify, but he knew he murdered the young man. Victims 9 and 10 were young Scottish laborers he picked up in pubs in Soho. Even after the first murder, Nilsson realized he would not stop until apprehended. It became an addiction to satisfy his longing for either a lifetime companion or his increasing desire to butcher and necrophilia. His 11th victim, a skinhead he picked up at Piccadilly Circus, had a tattoo around his neck that said, "Cut here." Nilsson obliged that meaning later after murdering the young man. Between the 6th and 11th murder, Nilsson picked up another young man and attempted to strangle him. When the young man escaped, he went to the police and filed a report. but the authorities dismissed the complaint as a lover's quarrel and refused to take any further action. On September 17, 1981, Malcolm Barlow, 24 years old, an orphan with several mental difficulties, loitered outside of Nilsson's residence. Nilsson confronted the young man in front of the house, and when the youth stated that he felt weak and suffered from epilepsy, the older man called an ambulance to come and get Barlow. When Barlow secured release from the hospital, he returned to Nilsson's residence. Waiting on the doorstep until Nilsson's return from work, the older man invited Barlow into his residence. When the two sat down, they drank beer until Barlow fell asleep. Seeing the young man as a nuisance, Nilsson strangled him to death. Nilsson stuffed Barlow's body underneath the kitchen sink. In October of 1981, Nilsson moved to new lodgings in Muswell Hill at 23 Cranley Gardens. This house had an attic where his apartment was situated, and he lost the use of a garden and even under the floorboards for disposal. That same month, he met a young student at Soho. Nilsson took the young man home, and when he awoke the next morning, he had no recollection of what had occurred the night before. The young man noticed he had bruises around his neck and visited a doctor. The doctor notified the young man that he demonstrated signs of being strangled and advised him to go to the police. Because of his sexual orientation being exposed, the young man declined filing a report. Later that year, Nilsson picked up a drag queen named Carl Stoddard, and after trying to drown the man in some water, the intended victim managed to escape, but never reported the incident. The first victim that Nilsson murdered in his new residence was John Howlett in December 1981. Nilsson brought the young man home, and Howlett immediately got undressed and got into Nilsson's bed. Nilsson tried to get him to leave, but Howlett refused, and Nilsson developed a severe dislike for him and decided that he had to die. What ensued became a life-or-death struggle for the both of them. Nilsson grabbed a loose upholstery strap and began strangling Howlett. Howlett managed to gain the upper hand and strangle Nilsson almost to the point where he lost consciousness. Finally, Nilsson regained control and strangled Howlett to the point where he was sure the man was dead. But Howlett kept reviving to the point where Nilsson resorted to drowning him in the bathtub. After murdering Howlett, Nilsson left the body on the bathroom floor until he decided what to do with it. The next day, Nilsson decided to cut the body into little pieces and then flush them down the toilet. This mechanism took longer than expected, and as he had friends coming over to visit, Nilsson took the body part he could not flush and boiled off the flesh. The remaining part that he boiled, Nilsson threw them over his back fence into a waste area. Some of the smaller bones he threw into the trash, others were sprinkled with salt, placed into a garbage bag, and stored in a tea chest, covering the chest with a red curtain. His second victim, murdered at the new residence, was Archibald Graham Allen in December 1981. Nilsson brought the man home, made him an omelet, and then discovered the man dead. This murder, according to authorities, appeared to be the most bizarre. At first, Nilsson believed the man had choked on a piece of the omelet that he'd made for him due to his inability to remember if he actually murdered the man or not. Nilsson placed him into a bath and left him there for 3 days. He then proceeded to dissect him as he had Howlett. Nilsson's last victim, Stephen Sinclair, aged 20, took drugs and was known to loiter around Leicester Square. On January 23, 1982, a group of Sinclair's friends witnessed Sinclair walk off from the square with a strange man. Once Nilsson brought Sinclair to his residence, the young man injected himself with an unknown drug, probably heroin, and fell asleep in a chair. Nilsson went into his kitchen and found some really thick string. He first noticed that he cut the string too short and tried to attach it to one of his ties. Then, Nilsson poured himself a drink and contemplated what he would do with his newest victim. He thought to himself, Sinclair must suffer from a great deal of personal pain, and by ending Sinclair's life, Nilsson saw it as a way to release the young man from what appeared to be a lifetime of pain. Nilsson took the tie and wrapped it around Sinclair's throat and slowly tightened the ligature. Sinclair struggled very little, and Nilsson realized that he only used enough force to cause unconsciousness. Nilsson whispered to the dead man, "Nothing can hurt you now." Nilsson removed the bandages from Sinclair's arms. He later discovered that the young man recently tried to commit suicide with a razor, then placed Sinclair's corpse into the tub and washed him. Nilsson then took Sinclair's corpse and placed it in his bed, removing his clothing so that he could lie naked next to the dead man. 2 mirrors set up near the bed gave Nilsson a glimpse as to what he looked like with the other man on the bed. The older man turned Sinclair's head to get a kiss. The dog, Bleep, ran into the room to sniff the corpse. Allegedly, the murder of Sinclair became Nilsson's undoing. When Nilsson finished with Sinclair, he dissected the body and boiled certain parts of it on his stove. Some of the organs were flushed down the toilet, and other parts were placed into the tea chest and into a cubbyhole into the bathroom. In the first week of February 1983, the 5 other tenants in Nilsson's building complained to the landlord that the downstairs toilet did not flush properly. Nilsson began to panic and ceased flushing anything further down the toilet. Over the next few days, the landlord called a plumber in to investigate. The plumber determined that the problems with the irregular flushing was underground and therefore called in a specialist. 2 days later, when the specialist, Michael Catron, went into the nearby manhole, he noticed a very putrid smell. Catron shined his flashlight at the floor of the sewer and noticed some sludge. When he made a closer inspection, they appeared to be pieces of flesh, approximately 8 inches thick. When he emerged from the sewer, Catron phoned his supervisors, with the tenants standing around, including Nilsson, and informed them of this discovery, where the police would have to be called once positive confirmation had been made of the sludge. In fact, Catron brought several of the tenants, including Nilsson, to see the pile of fleshy sludge. Nilsson sneaked back to the site where the technician unloaded the fleshy sludge and dumped it in another area. The walls were closing in quickly. He then returned to his flat where he sat and drank, contemplating suicide, where he was surrounded by the remains of 3 men. When Catron returned the following day, he noted the sewer cleaned and spoke to the other tenants about their suspicions regarding Nilsson. Deep beneath the street, in the sewer, Catron extracted 1 piece of foul-smelling meat and called the police. On February 9th, 1983, while Nilsson was at his office, he told another co-worker that, "If I'm not in tomorrow, I'll either be ill, dead, or in jail." He and the co-worker laughed about it, but when Nilsson returned to his apartment that evening after work, 3 men waited in the hallway to his apartment for his return. The detective chief inspector, Peter J., confronted Nilsson about his drains, and then asked where he hid the rest of the body. Nilsson, at this point, gave up and told Chief Inspector J that he would go with them to the station and divulge everything. When Nilsson divulged the horrific details of his killing career for the last 5 years, authorities realized that signs appeared where they could have ended the killings over that period. Law enforcement immediately brought the remains to the medical examiner. When authorities searched Nilsson's apartment, they discovered human remains within his closet that reached various stages of decomposition. Nilsson also told them to look into the tea chest and under a drawer in his bathroom. Nilsson also referenced police to his former residence, where he stated that there were 12 to 13 men may still be buried. In a nonchalant way, Nilsson stated to police, "The victim is the dirty platter after the feast, and the washing up is an ordinary task." When Nilsson began confessing on February 11th, 1983, for over 30 hours, Nilsson enclosed the gruesome details where he spoke about the techniques of dismemberment, concealment, and helped authorities to identify different body parts. Although his recitations presented the investigators with valuable information, Nilsson demonstrated no remorse and expected no compassion whatsoever when relating the events for the last 5 years. When the police escorted Nilsson back to the Melrose Avenue address, with his assistance, the police assembled some body parts into whole victims. but not only in the apartment, but the grounds surrounding that apartment where he disposed of human body parts after the bonfires. Upon returning to the police headquarters, a court-appointed attorney listened to the confession and remained satisfied that the suspect knew exactly what he imparted to the police. When the interrogation took place, one investigator stated that Nilsson was nothing but a predator. To this statement, Nilsson made a correction. "I seek company first and hope everything will be all right." After completing the confession, authorities charged Nilsson with various charges, including 6 counts of murder, 2 charges of attempted murder, with the lesser charges being necrophilia, dismembering a corpse, and concealing evidence. The prisoner was removed to Brixton Prison, where Nilsson would await his trial. The trial began on October 23, 1983, and Nilsson pled not guilty. Psychiatrists testified at the trial as to Nilsson's mental difficulties, but some made the mistake of using medical terminology that confused and confounded the jury. Even the judge displayed doubt that Nilsson displayed any psychopathy that would cause him to act in the legal definition of insane. In fact, when the judge charged the jury, he stated that a mind can be evil without being abnormal. On November 4th, 1983, at 11:25 a.m., the judge said that he would accept a majority count when it came to the verdict of attempted murder of Paul Nobbs. At 4:25 p.m. of that day, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. Nilsson is serving a life sentence within Her Majesty's Prison, Full Sutton Maximum Security Prison, near Pocklington in West Yorkshire. During his stay in prison, Nilsson has brought proceedings over the prison system itself due to the fact that they have denied him access to any homosexual pornography. He also brought further proceedings to allow him to publish his autobiography, The History of a Drowning Boy.
In his quest for companionship, Nilsson became the quintessential serial killer. Murder, dismemberment, and finally concealment. The longing within this man for a lifetime partner became more of an obsession and finally an addiction to murder. Although authorities arrested their killer, the fact that he exhibited no remorse and expected no mercy empowered his selfishness. But if there were no guilt, why was he so prepared to divulge his most horrendous details of the crimes that he committed? Having been apprehended, perhaps Nilsson wanted to demonstrate to the world what happens when someone reaches their emotional breaking point. Oscar Wilde once wrote in his masterpiece, The Picture of Dorian Gray, "I don't want to be at the mercy of my emotions. I want to use them, to enjoy them, and to dominate them." Until next time.